So I will go ahead and get started here. I went over time when I was asked to give a 5-minute talk this morning, and I gave a 15-minute talk on accident. So I am promising to be more disciplined, and I know that my esteemed panel of UC folks and growers will also be very disciplined with their time this afternoon as they share their rich a history of experiences and traumas with freeze. So if everyone can see my slide here, uh, of course you plan a freeze meeting after having 3 years of back-to-back sudden autumn freezes to varying extents, and then of course it rains. And we are probably not going to have severe freeze damage this year, thankfully, but we're recording this meeting for posterity and for folks who didn't attend so that they can be prepared for the next sudden autumn freeze. We'll introduce our esteemed panel later, and many thanks to Sherry Cooper of A&R program support. So I wrote an article with the great Janine Hazy on the 5 steps to prepare for a sudden autumn freeze. And it really begins back in August with, by the end of August, stopping any nitrogen fertilizer to mature trees. By mid-August, stopping any for young trees. Try not to have vigorous growth going into fall. And plus, late August onwards, you are not in peak root growth at all. That's back in spring and early summer. So it doesn't make sense to be applying nitrogen then anyways. Step 2 is for young trees to do a withholding of irrigation in early to mid-September, maybe up to 2 to 3 weeks, but long enough that you see this terminal bud that Janine has photographed here in the bottom right. Once you have that terminal bud, you can resume irrigation without a risk of causing more tender growth that would be really, really freeze prone. Step 3 is irrigate if the soil is dry going into November, or in our case this year, just experience an atmospheric river and have way more water than you need, especially as you're continuing, you're in the midst of walnut harvest. Step 4 is to continue to actively monitor your soil moisture, particularly that top foot of soil moisture that's so key, that when that top foot is moist, is at field capacity, it can store a lot more heat during these sunny days, and then during a freeze event at night, it will re-radiate that heat back up into the canopy. And so just waiting until we are past the threshold of having some days, several days at or just above 32 degrees, that helps acclimate the trees to freeze. Because once we're in the dead of winter, we can get temps well below freezing, and walnut trees are fine, but they need to be acclimated. So keeping an eye on that and deciding whether your trees are good and acclimated yet. And then if a freeze is predicted, and even if you have a dry soil crust that would prevent the re-radiation of that stored heat, be sure to irrigate 2 to 3 days ahead of time. These are my favorite soil moisture probing and augering devices. I think that we are still in a drought here, so it's really important, not only from freeze but for irrigation purposes in general, to invest in good soil moisture by feel augers and soil probes. Step 5, if you do suspect damage, go ahead and take a pocket knife and cut into the wood. And pretty quickly after a freeze, on the southwest side particularly, you should see some browning discoloration, as Janine's photographed here. And then you come in with 50% dilute 1-to-1 water to paint white interior latex paint that Wilbur Reel showed could reduce freeze damage from sunburn after a freeze, reduce damage by half or more just by coming in and painting that southwest side. All right, as always, you can find info on sackvalleyorchards.com or the San Joaquin equivalent, sjvtandv.com. And you should all be listening to my podcast, Growing the Valley. The latest episode was with Janine about sudden autumn freeze. Okay, well, I kept it to 5 minutes. And so now we're going to turn to the meat of this meeting, which is an esteemed panel of UC folks and walnut growers who will be sharing their experiences. So panelists, you have a few prompts on your right-hand side. Please do try to keep your comments to 3 or 4 minutes. I'll definitely cut you off after 5 minutes because we want to cycle through the whole list and then be able to have some more conversations between the panelists. And if you do have questions for the panelists, be sure to enter them in the Q&A. So without further ado, I will turn it to Carrie Arnold. Dr. Arnold is the pomology farm advisor in Stanislaus County. Carrie, could you share a little bit about your experiences with freeze and some of the solutions that you've seen out in the field?
Well, thank you very much, Luke. And that was a great summary, very quick and concise, to the point. Yes, so I'm more than happy to speak to this very quickly. So in mid-November, these were the past few years, pretty much since I started as an advisor, I've been looking at freeze and going, well, what is that? So, and luckily my colleagues have been really great in helping me along that path and understanding what it is. Additionally, PCAs, I've actually had PCAs call me out and say, I think this is freeze damage. So it's been a great learning experience. So in mid-November of last year and the year prior, we had cooler temps, right? I think we can all agree on that. Arguably, according to the CIMA stations, it was never actually cold enough to damage dormant wood. So it could be the fact that a lot of that wood wasn't dormant, but I think it goes without saying that it's important to realize that bud temperature and branch temperature, tissue temperature can actually be colder than the ambient air temperature. So it could very well be colder or warmer in the sense of dormancy and other issues in cherries and et cetera. For chilling hours, we have to understand that just because the CIMA station may say one thing, it may be a little bit cooler in our site and in our tissues. So I did receive various farm calls in the spring of last year, and the spring of this year and the spring of last year, and showing freeze damage. It was in most commonly grown varieties. So I saw it in Chandlers, Howards, Tulare, et cetera, both in younger and older orchards. It was traditionally an issue that you would find in younger orchards because we were pushing them to grow too far into the fall. This was certainly a great opportunity to learn about freeze damage, but also have those conversations about what should be done to prepare your orchard for cooler temperatures, as Luke has gone over and Janine helped relay that message. So there's been a lot of a learning curve there for me and also for my growers and my PCAs, my clientele, to understand we do need to stop fertilizing in August. We need to slow down the growth in September by slowing down the irrigation, that sort of thing. And so those updates to management have been added into most standard operating procedures for many growers in my area. I did reach out to the Bartons, and Josh Barton had a moment to speak with me. He is buried with harvest, but he would have been more than happy to be here if he wasn't still out there picking up nuts. So he felt that he saw freeze damage oftentimes in the same fields that were affected by it in the past. Cool nights, no rain in November. And it seemed for him to be directly associated to new whip growth, whether that be in young orchards or new orchards. I'm sorry, young orchards or old orchards. And so in these fields that have been affected by freeze damage, he's tried to really manage that new whip growth to keep it from growing into October and November. And he's doing things along the lines of maybe longer intervals between irrigations. In these sites, he's irrigating a little bit later in November instead of right after harvest. But with the vast majority of his orchards that are not affected by freeze, he's been following those same standard operating procedures as is suggested here in the presentation that Luke provided. So he really sees it as a lot of that WIT growth, that new growth at the end of the season is being affected by freeze. And in some cases where the freeze damage was far deeper than that, you're getting so much new growth from those affected trees that they're seeing repeated freeze damage in those tissues in the following years. So at the end of that, also, I think it's really important to support a healthy orchard. So make sure that you're not irrigating too soon in the spring. Make sure that you're only fertilizing as much as you need, and make sure you're controlling all your pests and diseases and that sort of thing, because you have to have a healthy plant and you have to have a healthy root system to have a healthy orchard going into fall. And I will leave it at that. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Carrie. And now we will turn to Emerita Farm Advisor from Lake County, Rachel Elkins, who's on the phone. Rachel, could you share some of the Lake County perspective on freeze, where you experience freeze more frequently than we do in these other counties?
Yes, hello everybody. Sorry, I don't have a camera. So, can you hear me, Luke?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, Lake County is a mountain district. We're probably, maybe other than some of the foothill orchards in Amador, but we are probably the highest elevation growing area, commercial growing area in California. The level of Clear Lake is for about almost 1,400 feet. And so our orchards go anywhere from that around the lake in our main areas. And we actually have quite a few orchards that go up into our bench and our higher elevations. Lake County is also unique in that we have a very high percentage of dryland orchards. And we also have a high percentage of older cultivars, mainly Hartley, Franquette are the two main ones. And one of the reasons, of course, that we basically grow we do have quite a few acres of Chandler now. That's what people have planted. But our cultivars our varieties are selected based on the fact that we have a late spring frost pattern. And so we really have to try and avoid walnut blight and frost in the spring. So since we are a late, our growing season tends to start late, anywhere from 2 weeks to even a month after other growing areas in the state. And that's going to extend us later into the fall as well. But we are cut off in the fall by an early fall frost season. So generally, and I'm basically going to, most of our mitigation practices, I echo pretty much everything that Carrie said. But when you don't have water and you are under dry land, you really can't use irrigation as a mitigation practice to try to put water into your soil prior to a freeze. So basically, you get what you get. The dryland orchards are almost all the older orchards, almost, I would say, probably 100% of our Chandler plantings, which range from pretty newly planted all the way up now until probably some of the oldest Chandler plantings in the state are all irrigated. So because Chandler is a higher value and is planted more in standard planting and operated with irrigation and standard commercial practices, the advice would be the same as to others. It's sometimes a little tricky because since we are a lake district, trying to decide when you're going to put a halt to things it's a little bit of, I think, trial and error. You know, somebody's going to have to try and figure that out because we do have a lot of microclimates as well. I did put together a newsletter back in June. It's posted on our website, and I explained pretty much all of the ins and outs and what happened, the causes and management. One of the issues that I think, so going back to the situation in Lake County, there's kind of three situations. There's the dryland orchard of older cultivars. There's more mature orchards of Chandler, and then there's the newly planted orchards. And so you have the situation where on the biggest problem with a newer planting that gets hit 2 and 3 times is deciding if you're going to give up on trying to keep getting this orchard going. You can look out at an orchard and see that there's lots of green out there, but when you look carefully, all you've really got is your rootstock because the graft has died back, sometimes twice. And I have growers trying to decide now whether it's really worth it to keep replanting these young blocks because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. On the bigger blocks, the blocks that were irrigated going into the fall freeze, the damage is much, much less than the dryland trees. The dryland trees, you're seeing very little recovery. On the irrigated trees, although the harvest is down this year, you're seeing much more recovery, but still they were pretty hard hit. But irrigation really does make all the difference in the world. So other than that, your tree water status, your carbohydrate status going into cold, that's the health of your trees. Your particular growing site, we see problems more in the gravelly areas, lighter areas, where the soils tend to be drier, water holding is less. And so I would have to say that it's, people are worried about, we had 3 years in a row, what's going to happen next year? We got lucky this year with rain, although it's really causing a lot of havoc for harvest here. And that's why I don't have a grower on the list because they're all busy trying to rescue a crop. But I would say that is worrisome. And hopefully we will have give us a break and we'll see what happens. If anybody's interested in this newsletter, it's posted on our website, celake.ucanr.edu. And I will also, if anybody's interested in it, please let me know and I'd be happy to send a copy. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much for sharing that great perspective from Lake County, where not only because of elevation is freeze experienced so frequently, but there are more dryland folks, so the tool set is often more limited. Now we'll be going back to the northern San Joaquin Valley to Carrie Arnold's neighbor, Dr. Mohammed Nouri. Mo Nouri is the farm advisor in San Joaquin County. Mo, you've also all your time as a fairly new farm advisor has been spent during walnut freeze years.
You see, thanks, Luke. Good afternoon, everyone. So actually, my experience with the freeze started before I started my job. When I used to work at Kearney Center, I used also to cover olive in that time. So we got farm calls regarding olive, and thanks to Joe Grant when I started. Also.
Mo, your audio is fading in and out.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Perfect. Sorry for that.
Thank you.
So I told you my story with the freeze started before I started my job when I used to work at Kearney. And in that time, we got farm calls regarding olive. So from that, we started to collect informations from like the lowest temperature based on the CME station close to that area, which is here in San Joaquin County. So I would like to be a little bit, or to mention more things. We have the same variety, same age of the trees that got affected as Carrie, you, Luke, and Rachel mentioned. But I would like to talk more about what happened exactly in the last 3 years in San Joaquin County as temperature. So when we collected those temperature from the CME station, close to, especially to Farmington area, French Camp, those are the area, the lowest area here, and they got really heated with the freeze damage. So November of 2018, we got what makes November 2018 a little bit different from November of 2020 is that in that time, we got a period of low temperature, few days together from the 10th of November until more or less the 20th of November, 10 days of very cold temperature, early morning or during the night, then warm nights. So in that time, we got some freeze damage. When I started my position, July 2019, Joe Grant, thanks to him, he took me and he showed me some orchards where they got some freeze damage in that time. So to November of 2019 was different. We went through, because the weather was a little bit warmer than 2018, than November of 2018. And we got maybe good rain in that time, I think. Same things for the winter of 2018. For November of 2020, which was the severe damage of freeze damage, we got actually more fluctuation of the temperature. We got 2 nights during the 9th and the 10th of November. Then the temperature goes up for a few days, then another 2 nights, very cold, and then the temperature continued to fluctuate at the end of November and early December of 2020. So I think those fluctuation of the temperature really caused a big damage or severe damage. The other things, I can mention that I visited some growers and we were walking in their orchards. We found in some area you feel that there is like kind of airflow, that you see it in the middle of the orchard. As all my colleagues, maybe you see it. In some cases, we saw like healthy trees next to damaged trees or few trees. And I think here, tree, if it's stressed, maybe if it has some root problems, not helping to uptake good amount of water, those trees, maybe they will get infected. And I have a great example with a grower in Farmington area. He did not get a lot of damage in his orchards, but in one trees, we found out that the sprinkler there was plugged and did not work. And that only trees, it got really severe infection or affection with the damage with the freeze. So other recommendation, we recommend the same things. I don't like to repeat what Kerry, Rachel, and you mentioned, but yeah, thanks. This year we got some good rain. Hopefully we'll get through, and hopefully we don't get any freeze anymore. So
absolutely, Mo, thank you so much for sharing that perspective and getting at one of the prompts about some of the patterns that we're seeing and why some trees are affected and others aren't. And you have a local grower to introduce for speaking up next.
Yes, so we have Mike DeVincenzi. You are talking about Mike, right? Yes. So Mike, he's a grower and he's a PCA. Thanks for him a lot. Actually, Mike, he helped me a lot when I started my position. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank him so much. And I'm sure he has also good information to share with us this afternoon. So.
Hello.
Yes, we hear you, Mike.
Okay, dokie. Yeah, I'm not a grower. I'm a consultant in pest management, and I've been in San Joaquin County all my life and working with walnuts for a long time. We just, not to cover the same ground that was already covered before, we got plenty hits on plenty of orchards in the area, and was a surprise for many of them. I watch walnuts all the way from one end of the county to the other, from the south to the north, and from, we'll say, I-5 East. So we've got a lot of different soil types. The main reason, as everybody knows on this, is a lack of good moisture and the hot to cold weather. That spell that Mohammed had talked about, we went from 1029 to, this is out of the Linden Pest Cast Station, 1029 to 11.5. We were in the 80s and we hit as high as 87 degrees. It was a couple of days later from 11.8 through 11.15 the next 6 days out of that were in the 20s, and some of them dropped down to 22 and 23. So that was your trigger. And what had happened was we had gone through a very dry winter last year, and we had a dry summer, and we didn't have good soil moisture. Much of the ground, and we'll say from, San Joaquin County at all, from Farmington, Linden, Stockton, it's either clay or clay loam. So once they lose the deep moisture, it's very, very difficult to replenish it. And being in pest management, mites were showing it. We had about one of the earliest mites year we would ever seen, and those are orchards that hadn't seen any insecticides, nothing we were doing. The mites are going to follow dry conditions, and we were fighting mites. God, it was in early June already at the time. Digging down, we see we had no moisture. The problem with these clay soils is the moisture doesn't go down; it goes to the side, no matter how hard the growers try. So we go into harvest, we limp into harvest, we get into harvest, we get our harvest off. All the growers irrigate after harvest. The ground is too heavy, and we can't get enough on and get it deep enough to get good deep soil moisture. So consequently, we end up with the damage that we saw. It was on all varieties, the newer varieties, particularly Howard, Chandler, Tulare, and Solano. Trees from first leaf planted that year all the way to some of the older Chandler blocks that are well into their 20s. The damage was anywhere from a light to 75% of the trees, particularly in some of the older ones, and particularly in the Chandlers. The crop loss was negligible to down 25% of a normal crop as of this year. We haven't, many of the growers that got hit haven't pruned it out yet. They're probably going to get started on that pretty soon. Growth came back, that was fine, but we were set up the same way this year, even though many of them knew what was happening. They still were having a difficult time keeping that deep soil moisture. And this 6-7 inches of rain that we just got sure is going to help out. That's for sure. And then I probably won't have to worry as much if this weather is just different weather pattern right now completely, which will help. Observations from growers out there when we talked about it, and we saw that it had to do with dry soil conditions, was doggone it, you're probably right. Because where the hauler was putting the whole water out in the orchard, when the ditches were put between a couple of rows, those rows weren't hit. Same thing like Muhammad said, he had one there that got hit that didn't have any water. Well, these few rows would get water and they didn't have any damage at all. And the rest of the orchard would hit hard. That Farmington Collegeville area got hit real hard, but so did parts of Linden and Stockton. So it just depends on how much soil moisture they had and at the time, and if they could get the water to go down. Some of the coldest areas that we have is in the river bottom in the Lockford Clements area. And I've got some pretty substantial acreage of varying stages of trees in that area. But the water can go down there, and the grower can put on 3 or 4 inches of water over a period of time, and it will, or 2 or 3 inches, and it'll take it. It's a silty, more of a silty, sandy soil rather than a clay loam. I had virtually no damage at all on any of those, and we've seen damage in there sometimes in the past. But it was very, very clean. Although other orchards, I understand, in that area weren't as lucky, and I would assume they were probably dry. So that's our challenge, and this challenge isn't going to go away, especially if we stay in a drought condition. But that's pretty much what we saw.
Mike, thank you so much. That is a really great perspective, and really great because you cover so much ground, so that you were able to see the pattern there over a county plus is really, really appreciated. Thank you for being on the panel.
You're welcome.
And now, just a reminder to folks as you come up with questions, there's already a few great questions that have been posed, but keep thinking about questions and put those into the Q&A and not into the chat. And now I will turn to the person who's really taught me everything about all, sudden autumn freeze that I've ever, that I know now is really it all came from Janine Hazy. And we've written countless articles together on the subject, and most recently, of course, that podcast. So, Janine, we don't want to keep reiterating too many of the same points, but what are some of your thoughts and things you'd like to share?
Thank you, Luke. Actually, right when you were introducing me, I was thinking that over my 40 years of working with walnuts now, I have had many opportunities to experience sudden autumn frost and also winter kill. But I was actually thinking back to some of the older advisors that preceded me and publications that were actually very helpful. One's from like the 1920s publication, and what Norm Ross wrote about, he was in Stanislaus County. I never had the opportunity to meet him, but I just suddenly flashed on what he wrote about sudden autumn frost versus winter freezes. And it was really, really helpful to me as a younger advisor. So one of the things that I've noticed over my career is that most of the sudden autumn frosts or freezes affected younger, vigorous trees only until, as I recall now, 2018. And that was the year when we saw the extensive damage of obviously statewide, but up in my area on the younger trees all the way up to very older trees in their 30s. And so that, I mean, we've already been touching on it, the extremes that year. So that was those extreme daytime and nighttime temperatures, and that really rapid cooling temperatures. And so in that particular year, especially, you need slow cooling for the starch that's in the limbs to convert to sugars, which essentially helps protect the cells from the frost injury. It's sort of like an antifreeze. So I don't know. I mean, I've experienced many years with these extremes, but I think that was a very extreme year. Obviously, the campfire was happening. It was extremely dry. All of these factors, I think, probably came together so that we saw more damage that year. And again, like you said, not to repeat, but I just have to reiterate what Mike was saying, Carrie, Rachel, everyone has been saying. Again, I have found extremely high correlation to where orchards have moisture versus ones that are dry and the amount of frost damage. It's not a total correlation, but it's extremely high correlation. And so in that particular year, and I'm bringing up 2018 just because there were so many damaged orchards, and it's good examples. So one of the orchards, a huge orchard, 500 acres, that this one area, 13 acres, it's on sandier soil, but that area had been irrigated earlier in October, whereas all the others got irrigated later. All the other blocks in that particular orchard got irrigated later, and they all got more water going into November. And so when that frost came, only that one 13-acre block, just the fact that it didn't get as much irrigation, and it was earlier. And that's why I always say to growers, whatever, either we have rainfall going into November. If we don't, then you need to supplement with irrigation. And I know Matt, who I'm about to introduce, is going to bring up all of his experiences, which support a lot of what I've seen. So I won't reiterate, but Also in 2018, I have examples where there were orchards right next to each other, but different growers. One had district water, one didn't. They were cut and didn't have a well. One had a well and district water, one only had district water, was cut off. So the orchard that didn't get irrigation except in early October had all this damage. The one right across where they were able to come in and irrigate more, there was no damage. Same variety, same soil type. So I think with that, I'll stop at this point, and I'd like to introduce a longtime walnut grower in our area, Matt Conant, whose family actually has been farming for like a century. And he's down in the Rio Oso area of Sutter County. So Matt, you can tell them all about your experiences.
Thank you, Janine. So I'm Matt Conant, and I'd like to just talk briefly about some of the issues that we found. And yes, I couldn't agree more with what everything Janine's saying. I also think that in our case, we've never had frost damage in any of these orchards where we had it until 2018 and 2020. And in 2020, one of the blocks, we supplemented a lot of water afterwards, after harvest and during harvest, and we had no damage there at all. But we had a huge amount of damage in 18 because we were repairing a well and we had district water. But we didn't have district water in end of October and into November. And the other field we had in 2018 and 20, we had damage, and that well has had a lot of problems with sand. And so we thought, oh, we're okay. We've got enough water, ground moisture. All the leaves were healthy. We had plenty of moisture in the leaves. We thought, well, when you get one of those cold snaps, you better be ready and you better have water. And also, I think one of our problems is we farmed that ground for many, many years and never had any damage. But the growers to the south of us, the elevation of their soil is a little higher, up to 4 and 5 feet, used to raise rice. And they did rice decomp. And so there was water on that soil. And I think that when they did that and pulled it in and planted into trees, all that cold air just runs down into our orchards. And so I think we're more susceptible to having damage, but I do think that, and my message would be to anyone who deals with this, if you have a dry fall and you're coming into a dry fall year and it's the end of October and you haven't had any rain and you're done with your harvest, turn your irrigation on, start it, and then watch your forecast. If you see that you have cold weather coming in the evenings, and sometimes in the daytimes it'll be very warm, and in the 70s. But look at your lows in the evening. And if those lows get into the low 30s or high 20s, you better think about starting another irrigation schedule and try to get it on before you have that freeze. That would be my words of wisdom. And I hope that helps. Janine, did you have any other questions or concerns?
Oh, well, I think that people are asking questions in the panel where you're going to have opportunity to answer questions in that as we go along.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you,
You're
Matt.
welcome.
And then last but certainly not least, man's a saint, putting up with being the last panelist here. My cooperator, Hal Crane, based up in Tehama County. Hal, could you share your perspective? You're even a little bit more aggressive than what we've been talking about so far in terms of soil moisture. You take it to the next level.
Okay, thanks, Luke. No, so I'm trying to take some notes here because I think a lot of the things were touched on, and rather than be repetitive, I'm trying to see if I can go through a list of some things maybe that would help in addition to what was already said. So you kind of alluded to it. with the exception of Lake County, because we all know that they have extreme challenges with the frost and a lot of difficulty there on stuff that's not under irrigation. So a lot of what I say might be with exception to that. And one of them being this far north, we've been battling this, I think, a lot longer. I know of a lot of the events that have been just horrific farther down south. Those years we have the same problems, but we've had them for a little bit longer. So a lot of the things I say, I'm not trying to say out of arrogance, but out of bad experiences that I think I've had a little bit longer. So I've been dealing with this for quite a while. So keep that in perspective. But so where do I start? One key item I didn't hear said that I've noticed that I think will be very valuable is that we are very well under the understanding that the fall cold temperature forecasts that you get are not nearly as accurate as what you have in the spring. Like if you're an almond grower with Frost Watch, they hit it pretty close on their predictions. I'll give you an example, and it's to a T. I don't know if it's something, I'm not sure what caused it, but I'll give you the really drastic event we had. I think it was 2017 or 18 fall. It was October 28th. The forecasts, I look at many of them in the fall when we're dealing with this frost stuff. It was the low in the area was supposed to be 37. And I will tell you that night it got down to, on October 28th, I'm still doing repick. It was a dry harvest. So we were able to wrap up the first pick earlier. And it got down to 22 degrees that night in one of my blocks with a low forecast of 37. So that's an extreme case, but I'm here to tell you that I know right now that this fall, if they're calling for colds, that we expect a lot colder than what they predict. They're not near as accurate in the fall. So keep that in mind. Be careful. If you're watching the frost forecast, that event, I didn't see anybody else. I don't think I ran by any other blocks that had the water going. I don't think people were aware it was going to get that cold. And that leads to my next point. So I have frost alarms in every orchard remote. And again, that's just because I've been burned so many times that it's a necessity. So don't depend on just your forecast, although that helps when they call it. But when they miss it, you miss it one time, you're done. So that's one point. What was my next? Let's see, follow temps. I've had enough bad events that I'm pretty well convinced under certain circumstances, I think that it's the damage is almost 100% preventable. And when I say that, under certain caveats, a lot of walnut orchards aren't designed like almond blocks where you can water the whole block for a spring frost event. So if you don't have enough pumping capacity to turn on all the valves in a block, then this point isn't valid. If you're able to do that and get coverage on 100% of the orchard, all those blocks that I have, the worst events you've ever seen result in no damage. And again, I did it wrong a lot of times, had lots of problems before, but that's where I'm at now just because it's happened so many times. So we have a 3-step process we follow every year now. We farm fall frost exactly like almond growers do their spring frost watch. So we go through a 3-step process in the fall. And one of them is October 15th, I have a recurring reminder on my calendar to turn the alarms on, because that October 28th burned a ton of people. Luke can attest to. I think that was 17 or 18, Luke. I know you got calls all over the place, a lot of damage, and it caught everybody off guard because that was that forecast that wasn't supposed to be cold, and people woke up and couldn't believe what had happened.
Yeah, it was 2018 during the campfire.
Yeah. And we'd had several before that, many years before the similar experiences. So, but that's one that was pretty far reaching. So the 3-step process is, number one, harden off the vegetative growth in September. And that mainly applies to young trees. The crop load takes care of that for the most part on mature trees. They, in essence, are somewhat stressed by bringing the crop to delivery to us at harvest time. And a lot of times you shut water off, and they get some water stress just due to the fact that you have to shut down for harvest. But so on the younger trees, we're hardening them off in September, which that's already been said, so there's no big mystery there. The second component then, as soon as that's done, rehydrate is completely. So we will put on well in excess of ET extensively until we've got reasonable moisture back in the ground to rehydrate. And when I'm sorry, go back to step one on the hardening off. been fairly easy with since we've been able to have the pressure bomb, a lot easier to do. So we'll set target levels on moisture stress and hold it there for an extended amount of time. It takes sometimes 3 to 4 weeks. On the heavier clays, if you've got reasonable soil moisture, it can take you weeks and weeks and weeks without irrigation. On sandy soils, it might be just shutting off for a week. So I can't give you a timetable how long it takes to harden them off, but the pressure bomb will tell you. And if you run the pressure bomb numbers up and don't get to the point where they defoliate and hold it there for a significant amount of time, and then you rehydrate it significantly after the event of drying down, that step 2. The third step is we turn on irrigations during the event, just like an almond farmer in the spring. So our alarms are on every night. We're on frost watch, somebody's on it, and we aggressively do that. And this last year, I don't know that statewide the temperatures, but we had some just ridiculously low temperatures, and everything was prepped in that fashion. I did have some frost damage, and those will be those blocks where I can only irrigate, say, half of the total area. In that event, we rotate valves in the middle of the night. We'll fire up, try to get on early, and rotate valves to do the best we can. We had some real mild damage on vegetative growth in the very tops of the trees that's somewhat insignificant. And on the young stuff that sustained those just crazy low temperatures are in perfectly good shape. So again, don't take it. I'm not trying to be arrogant about that. Just I've had such bad experiences for so darn long that we've had to institute a pretty extensive program. So there's hope, is what I'm trying to say, is we just got to get, people are going to have alarms. Don't just depend on the forecast, have alarms out there and set them, and be extremely proactive. And it is so difficult to do. Everybody is so exhausted right now coming out of harvest that a lot of the bad burns are in late October, early November. And I know what it is, it's fatigue. So that's why I say turn the alarm on October 15th. So at least when you go home and get a good night's sleep for the first time, that you'll be awoken and not have to worry about it so much. So other than that, I think everything else that I had on my list has pretty well been covered. If there's any other stuff we can talk about later.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hal. We have a bunch of questions that have poured in, but before we turn to those, I just wondered if, real quickly here, if anyone on the panel wanted to address anyone else, had any additional comments after hearing the full panel go through once. All right, not hearing anything, we will turn to the questions. So the first question is, considering the primary window to build structural carbohydrates for storage is between July and November, carb production requires photosynthesis, and therefore chlorophyll and nitrogen is required for chlorophyll. Wouldn't it be conceivable that light rates of nitrogen to support this process without driving new vigorous growth could be advantageous depending on tissue levels? Who wants to take this one? And panelists, feel free to bring up the Q&A on your screens too, so you can read it. But if someone will tackle this I like this nerdy question about carbs. It's good. Anyone? All right, I'll take it. So I would say that again, I would really point more to root growth. So your nitrogen efficiency in fall is just going to be really low. And so I would stick with those August cutoffs. I don't think that you're sacrificing carbohydrates with a mid-August cutoff in young trees and an August 31st cutoff in mature trees. The main root growth is in late spring, early summer, and that's why we have the nitrogen program that Dr. Catherine Jarvis-Sheen has developed. So stick to that. I don't think that we're impacting carbs negatively with any of these practices. Next question is from the great Joe Grant, Emeritus Walnut farm advisor and now the research director for the Walnut Board. He asks, how much rainfall does the panel think is enough to prevent freeze and not have to irrigate? Someone help me out here.
I can chime up if you want. It's Hal Crane speaking. Depends on your conditions. If 2 inches of rainfall comes down in an hour and a half and you're on clay soils and it runs off, then it's a function of what you actually get in your soil profile, I guess is the easy way to put it. If you get it spread out and you get some infiltration on into some of those clay soils that Mike was talking about, I don't know if there's a perfect answer on that. Enough that would otherwise rehydrate the tree is probably the answer to that, which solves that infiltration question.
And I would say, check with the actual soil moisture. Take an auger if you don't have sensors out in the field. Take an auger or a probe and ground truth, and that top foot we know is the most important. Yeah.
One more
Hal.
thing on that, Luke. I don't mean to interrupt you, but to add to that, so remember that only one of the steps that you got to do is rehydrate. So that just because let's say you get 5 inches of rainfall, then one doesn't want to draw the conclusion, okay, we're safe, we're not going to have a problem this fall. So now you've got to step 2 where you're rehydrated. If you get a extreme super severe event, and you've only done 2 of the 3 steps, the third step being turn on during the event, albeit you're protected to a lower temperature with hydration, you're not protected to the bottom end. If it cracks off down to a 25 and they're not dormant yet at this stage, rehydration, I don't know what degree of protection. You might have protection to say 27 degrees today with the rehydration, which if they were dry, it would probably burn them at 32. Then the final step, once you have the rehydration, if you turn the water on during the event then and also help prevent the damage and you complete all the steps, then I think it'll help solve that problem.
Excellent. Really good information, Hal. Now turning to Corrine, who's a walnut grower in Paso Robles area. She said, I sprayed with 550 anti-stress on my first and second year Chandler trees this week to see if that will help prepare for a potential freeze. Do you think this will help? I have never heard of this material, and I would say stick with the best practices from the panel. Does anyone else have any other comments?
Matt Conant here. I don't think anything helps better than water. To the last question, when did that rain event occur? If the rain occurred in October and you're going to have a freeze event in early November, I think you better think about more water. No matter, because like Hal said, you got to have that water on that soil profile, and you got to have it right around the freeze event.
Thank you, Matt. Very good. Now turning to a question from Joshua Ram. Joshua asks, does the panel believe we've received enough rainfall in the major walnut growing areas to not irrigate again until spring? Or when would you advise optimal irrigation timing following the recent rainfall? And is the recent rainfall enough to partially protect growers from what was experienced last year regarding the freeze? And he acknowledges that there's a ton of factors and variables, but what's the general assessment of where things are headed into 2022 and beyond? Someone want to take an initial stab at that? It's similar to the question that was just answered, but a little different.
Well, you'd have to have a crystal ball. I mean, we don't know. So I think just what everyone's been saying, especially the PCA here, Mike, Matt, and Hal have been giving really good advice on monitoring. And so at this point, we don't know. Are we going to have a wet winter like we did in 2017 and 2019? Or are we going to go back into this weird no rain in January, February, and then when do we have to start irrigating like in the winter again? So you just have to be watching and then monitoring your orchard.
Yep.
Luke, just to add to.
I can add, Luke, if you want me
Can
to.
We'll let Mo go first real quick. Mo.
Oh, I didn't
Okay.
hear. Go ahead.
Thanks, Luke. Just to add to what Janice mentioned. So I think with the rain that we got now, it will help a lot, since our first things it's when the tree go dormant. So I think this rain will help, at least for this period, until the trees get dormant. So I think we'll see much better things compared to last year.
Yeah. And Mike, do you have anything to add?
I didn't pick up what Mo said there at the end.
He
cut out
he
on
was
me.
noting that he thought we were in a much better situation.
Right, and
compared
that
to
was
last year.
due to building up the conversion of the sugars, I would imagine, right? I would assume, Mohammed.
Due to the rainfall, right? Mo, sorry,
Right.
your
The
audio
rainfall,
was
and also
fading
the
out.
trees are going more for dormant. So
Mhm.
we'll have these windows that really will protect the trees compared to last year when we didn't get any rain. So I think this rain time or period will help a lot the trees until it will go dormant, fully dormant to the winter.
The question on the rainfalls, on the benefit of the rainfalls, there's no doubt it has benefit, but the benefit is all that came of that was that you had free rehydration. So that doesn't mean that you can then therefore assume that there's not going to be a problem. So it's no different than if you would have applied the moisture via sprinkler, but you still got to follow through with all the successive steps that need to be done to prevent. So now at least you've started off hopefully where you've got some hydration, but if it's not fully hydrated, you need to continue to do so, and then still proceed with turning on during the event to protect if it's a real significant event. So in essence, I think what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, it helped. It made it cheaper to achieve what we need to do because you got the rainfall for free, but you still need to be proactive and can't assume therefore that rainfall is going to prevent the damage.
Luke, too,
Yep.
there's one other thing, like to follow up on what Hal's saying is, so, and Mo, so we've had this great rain event, so we've got that moisture, keep monitoring that, as Hal was just saying. But the other thing is at least the temperatures up here, so we were like 70 degrees up here again today. And at night, we're getting down, into the 40s, but we need to start seeing some days getting closer into the 30s and closer to freezing. And if those are the kinds of temperatures we get, that's when you start getting more of that starch being converted to sugars. And so it's not just the rainfall, but hopefully we get the trees hardening off by having some more colder temperatures too, as we go along. So it's just important to watch those lows also. Does that make sense?
Makes really good sense, Janine. Thanks for making that point. And then just a final point on this question. There's already been such great information from the panel, but I would just note because the questioner asked about the rest of winter and even going into spring, I really like the advice for the fall and the winter months from Emeritus Irrigation Advisor Alan Fulton, who says, look at what the regular annual precip that you would get for that month, in an average year, and if you're not achieving that level of rainfall, supplement with irrigation if you can, so that over the winter you're refilling the soil profile, and it's not just a one decision one time during the winter of is it a dry winter or a wet winter. Just make it on a monthly basis and break it up that way is advice I really like. And then Joe Grant made the point in a comment that not everyone in the state received the rainfall that many of us did. So some of us are in different boats, pun intended. So now turning to another question from Corrine, with a 1-year-old tree that didn't really show any growth compared to the other ones after it was freeze damaged last year. Is it, how should she handle this? Is it going to recover versus not recover? And my understanding, both myself and Janine have written a lot about freeze recovery of trees, and it's not really the focus of this meeting, but it's something we should talk about. And Janine and I often will write that you should let the trees recover as much as they're going to. You know, don't prune until well into the middle of summer. You don't know what adventitious buds are going to push and things. But my understanding is that you're much more aggressive with these young trees that are freeze damaged, and you're not afraid to cull the herd.
Yeah, so my experience has been with numerous young trees being burned. It's a completely different answer that I would have for a mature tree or even a 2, 3, 4-year-old. A lot of these trees that I look at this summer that are older pop out of it and have an extreme vegetative push after the freeze as a response, a lot like a heavy pruning, you know, as a result of the freeze. On 1-year trees, my experience has been it's almost toxic in some way. When you have real significant freeze damage, it's very common that they don't recover well on a first leaf tree from that. And I dig them out. Now you can try that and you'll go out in an orchard. I've had an orchard I left like that many years ago. And it was probably about 30% of them had a strong recovery. And the others did not. I wished I'd pulled it. I did see an orchard in the Chico area this year that was first leaf that burned and it had a great recovery. So you can't say across the board, backhoe them out and start over or not. But I will tell you that a first leaf tree has a lot higher incidence of not recovering than the older ones. So I don't think it's a one-word answer on rip it out. I've had enough bad experiences with it that to foster along an orchard where you only had 30% of them respond well, then now all of a sudden we're on year 3 when we're replanting the other 70%. You're so far behind that the cash flow doesn't warrant it. So I'm pretty aggressive on removing first leaf.
One other point, just with young walnut trees in general, I've always said that if they don't grow the second year, just take them out because they're not going to grow. And so keep that in mind. I mean, we're talking about frost damaged trees here, but I'm talking about any new walnut tree. After you got through the first leaf, if you're in the second leaf and it really isn't growing, it's best usually to just replace it.
And maybe
Just
consider.
to add to Janine.
Yeah, go ahead, Mo.
Very quick. That tree maybe not only stressed with freeze, it may has other stress. So
Yep.
I agree with her.
Yeah, any other issue, just it's always somewhat depressing to go into walnut orchards and you see these replants or these young trees that never grew. So it's just a good rule typically.
That's a great point, Janine. And maybe consider replanting with VX211 rootstock. It's kind of the replant rootstock of choice with the tolerance to root lesion nematode and the high vigor.
Luke, I had one thing to
Yeah,
say.
Mike, go ahead.
So we had maybe 100, 150 acres that got hit in the South County in the heavy ground of 1 and 2-year-olds. And they're all on X or X11. And means it's heavy soil. Most of them, darn near all of them, came back fine. So I would say, I think they kind of mentioned it, but you got to read the orchard and see what's going on. We lost up to 50% of the wood on some of them, but when we let them take off and started on their own and they were strong enough that they're coming back, we made a cut and you can't tell the difference. They're doing very well. I was really surprised how well they're doing.
Mike,
But I think what it comes down to is you've got to read the situation. The tree's going to tell you whether you can keep it or not, and then go from there.
You bring up a great point, Mike, because I was alluding to that. I'm more aggressive than that. And I think you hit it right on the head with assess it, because when you're talking about 50% of the wood being killed, my experience is the same. If it's in less than 50, you got a pretty high return rate on those. A lot of the instances that we're seeing are what I was referring to on, I'll just backhoe it out immediately, is the ones that are more significant than that 50%. And there's a lot of those around. And when you get down in the 70%, you'll have what looks like a bare root planted tree. When you hit it, when it's out of the nursery, where all that's left is the bottom 8, 10, 12 inches. That's what I'm referring to, that I see very, very little good response on those. So good clarification there.
Excellent. And then Hal, this next question is also going to be for you because you are Mr. Active Frost Protection in walnuts. And just a note, because there's just so many folks across the state that don't have this option. Here in the North State, so many growers have solid set irrigation. They have the capacity for over 40 gallons per minute. You know, flow rates, which is what you need to get those 4 degrees of warming. And so many growers are used to actively frost protecting because they also grow almonds. But Hal, the question is, if a frost comes on before we can fully irrigate, can we mitigate damage by running sprinklers as we do for spring bloom frost protection?
Yeah, my answer to that is if you can't fully irrigate before, I mean, that's you just can't do it, then that's all you can do is run. So you have skipped a key protector, and that's having the wood hydrated. But I mean, it's the question is if you can't do that. So if you can't do that, then that's the only thing you can do. So what would happen in my experience on those is that running the water will protect it to a certain temperature. Pick a number, depends on how dormant or how close to acclimated they are. But if a 30-degree event would have otherwise caused a lot of damage on a dry tree, running the water, it would protect it down a significant temperature lower, maybe say to 26 degrees. And if that would have been hydrated after harvest and the water run, it'd protect it probably all the way down to, in my case, at 22 degrees with no problems. So yeah, that's all you can do is run it at that point when you're not able to do it after harvest, and it has a huge impact.
Excellent. Turning to another question from Joe Grant. Is there a point in time after harvest when irrigating would be too late to help? Too early? And again, how much water is enough to help? My quick initial answer to this would be, if you are not doing active frost protection, say you don't have the capacity with your irrigation system to do that, I would be concerned about irrigating, say, the day of a frost. During the day, you think it's going to freeze the following morning, and you're in the situation with clay soil, for example, where you have standing water. The biometeorologists say you do not want just standing water, because that will just freeze over like a sheet of ice, and it will not allow that stored heat in the soil to re-radiate back up. So that's why you try to get it on 2 to 3 days in advance. And then short of that, like the previous question, your last resort is active frost protection. That is your final and last option if you have the water availability and the system to apply it. Anything else? Anything else from the attendee, from the participants on that? Okay. Really good question that I'm not sure that this panel will be able to answer. But if someone does have an answer on the panel, be sure to blurt it out. And if not, maybe Joe Grant, if he has a guess, he could type it in the chat. The question is, are there any industry-wide estimates on year-by-year management costs associated with fall freeze damage? And I would just say that hopefully filling out this survey in the bottom right-hand corner, if you haven't already, and you're a walnut grower, ucanr.edu/walnut survey 2021. So hopefully some of that information will get us towards that. But I don't think that we have that answer right now. Any other thoughts from the panel? Okay. And then another question for Hal from Joe Grant. What temps are your frost alarms set for?
Tell me what the condition of the tree is and how well acclimated they are. I'm not, so we start off fairly high. So right now they're at 34. And then the other factor on that is there's no formula for that, because obviously at some point you need no frost control, even if it gets to 20. So it's a sliding scale and I don't have any way to know. So I'm just somewhat safe on that. And I'm set at 34 now. If we get if we get an event, say next week, and it's down to 32, 31, which would be beautiful because it's slowly going toward freeze, and they went through that without damage, then we'll start sliding it down, and I usually turn them off if I have to set it for 25 degrees, I'm not worried about it. So hopefully that answers your question. There's no formula, and I hear that a lot of people ask that. What's the magic number? Well, I don't know. Tell me how well hydrated your orchard is, number one. What age is the tree? So, and how much growth do you have? The new vegetative growth is more prone to freeze. So if you have a way overgrown second year tree, then boy, you better be more conservative for longer. And then assess once the wood's completely hardened off, and all that goes into the, like I said, just the thought process. But I start at 34 and just keep ratcheting it down until eventually I'm sick of my alarm going off.
So is that when you know that the trees are acclimated to freeze, when you're sick of your alarm going off?
Well, yeah, because I don't have a choice before that of being sick of it. I'm sick of it before that, but that's when I turn it off, put it that way.
Got it.
But yeah, so and it depends. The other thing to be careful about the fall, the 22-degree incident on October 28th, it went from 33 to 22, and I don't remember what it was. It was so damn fast I could hardly get stuff running. And that didn't happen everywhere. There's isolated, right? You don't have that county-wide. But on the particular block that was excessive, it dropped so darn fast that you better, to answer your question, how far do you have to drive to get your pumps on? Because if they're falling fast, you want it conservative. The stuff that I have to go farther for is set higher, and then it gives me more time to get there. So hopefully that answers the question. There's no magic formula, though. I wish there was one.
Luke, this is Mike.
Go ahead, Mike.
I had a question. So in the past, we haven't had this problem in our area. Very seldom do we see it. So we had it last year, and we know that 80-degree temperatures, and then within 3 days that dropped down to 22, 23. So we're blaming it on, because we've had these dry conditions before in our county. And watching the temperatures over the years, we've also had gradual, sometime going darn near all the way to November before we actually get a frost. So I'm just looking at our forecast for the 13th of November right now. And in our area, it's still in the 60s and the lows are in the 40s. So that's got to be playing some part of it. I'm just wondering how much part of that's playing, because that's been a little more common around here than what we saw last year. Does anybody want to tackle that? Because that ought to, I would think, with the amount of moisture we have, that ought to help acclimate them a little bit as they're going to bed. Anybody have any thoughts? Or
I would just agree with Hal's point that we really need more or I think it was actually Janine's point, that we really need more in the 30s as a low for these trees to start getting acclimated. It's still really warm in the early morning, late at night right now. So I would say that we're not experiencing great acclimation weather. And I would say that a big difference, and we don't have the research on this yet, but I would say that something that Maciej Zwiniecki, a physiology professor at UC Davis, has pointed out, that he thinks that the rain is really helpful in getting these trees headed towards dormancy. And sure enough, we saw with the big rain, all the leaves turn yellow kind of right away. And so I think that's part of the equation that we don't fully understand yet.
Right. That's real common, because last year when we finally did get a rain, everything changed overnight. Everything was green. And I'm talking about ornamentals in town, whatever it would be. We're seeing the same thing right now. After that thing that just came through, we've got color popping every which way. So that's why I was wondering.
And the leaf color is an indicator. Typically you're hardening off. So if you go look at that, the stuff that I'm looking at right now with the leaves dropping, I'm seeing it start in the hardening off process, where you watch that brown color move closer to the terminal tip. So maybe in this instance where the leaves are yellow, then to assess your risk for damages, look how much green wood is still left on the vegetative point, and that'll might scare you in some instances, because some of that on the younger trees where they've got 6-7 feet of growth on them, it's moved up the brown color a ways, but boy, there's a lot of exposure. So I think if you can look at the color of the wood.
Really good point, Hal. Really good point. Not even something I had thought about before, is that looking at the color of the wood this time of year.
Yeah, because you think with the leaves being, obviously they're headed towards dormancy, as everybody's well aware, but they're not to a point yet. They're probably more frost tolerant today than they were a week ago. Whereas
Yep.
if it was warm, that wouldn't have been the case. So it's the leaves are a good indicator, but it's a lot of times they don't assume that when they're coming off, obviously they'll be more frost tolerant, but they're still need some level of protection. We're getting better every day as the leaves are coming off though.
Yep. Question, will cover crops and gypsum help with moisture retention and therefore also enhance freeze protection? And I would say, kind of very loosely, indirectly, yes, anything you can do to improve your soil structure in the long term is going to improve infiltration and actually enable you to post-harvest refill that first foot plus. But the caveat there being, I think planting a cover crop wouldn't be too much of an issue, because it's going to barely have seeded by the time that a freeze will come around. But I followed the same thinking and research from the world of almonds, where you really do not want cover on the ground. You would ideally like a firm, bare, moist soil is going to be the warmest. So ideally, you do not, want weeds or grass to have the warmest orchard during a freeze. Other points from the panel?
Yes, Luke, that would be for right now, but for long-term, planting a cover crop, as long as it's one that you're not disking in. As you know, up here, I've always recommended annual reseeding that are no-till, okay? And this last rainstorm we had and the havoc that it played reminded me of what has happened before when we've gotten big rainfalls in October. And that's why it's very important to have no-till in walnuts that are harvested, because ones that were tilled, I don't think they're going to be able to harvest after that rainfall. It's been hard enough to even harvest in ones with, the nice firm. But anyway, to try and increase water penetration in the long term, thinking about a cover crop is a good idea. And you can have ones that you cultivate in on young non-bearing trees. But at least up here in the North State, it's really best to go with the annual reseeding types once you get into trees that are yielding.
Thank you, Janine. Question, is there any suspected correlation between calcium or boron levels and lower damage based on cell wall membrane or integrity? I don't know at all, and I would, I will beg ignorance on this question. Does anyone have anything? Maybe a question for Dr. Z at UC Davis. This is a question I'm also not sure whether we'll be able to answer, because I don't think any of us is licensed crop insurance adjuster. Given the recent freeze events, what is your best advice on crop insurance considerations for growers? Has it changed over the past few years? Does anyone on the panel have 2 cents on that, or should we steer well clear of this question? All right, I think we will steer clear of that insurance call. That's just, crop insurance is again one of those things, just the tremendous complexities and difficulties of farming and the calls you have to make. So not too many minutes left on the clock here. some more questions from Karina's. We'll see how many of them we can get to. You know, let's turn to this one. Drip irrigation doesn't provide a wide area of wet around the tree. Should fan jet sprinklers be used to get a wider wet area? I think that's a really good question about irrigation system. And yes, drip really isn't going to do much of anything for you. If you have double line, that's going to lead to more soil moisture and wetting pattern if it's on the surface. But yes, micros are going to provide you a larger wetted area. In terms of using micros during a freeze event, you have to have enough capacity in the system. So I think it's 20 gallons per minute in either 15 or 20 gallons per minute in micros. And if you're below that, the emitters will just plug and create a whole mess in the orchard. So don't run it. Don't use your system if you have a flow rate that's lower than that. You have to have a pretty high flow rate to be able to use micros for active frost protection, and you'll only get about 2 degrees of warming compared to the 4 degrees with solid sat. Anyone else on that question? Okay. We had windmills in our citrus. Is this too expensive for walnuts? My understanding with windmills is that you really have to have a low, you're inverting, you know, bringing down warmer air from above. So I think that that layer is just way too high for us in the middle of the Central Valley to do. You have to, I think that's something that maybe you can do in Paso or these other places where you have a much smaller valley. But if you're in a big valley like the Central Valley, my understanding is that unless you're on the edges of it, you can't use a technique like windmills.
Hey, Luke, I had something
Yeah.
related with the windmills made me think of. Another point on walnuts, on citrus, obviously the challenge is any 32 degrees is a major problem. They're much more sensitive to it. Don't forget that the fall frost is a very welcome. It's the killing frost that's not welcome. If we got a 32 degree temperature tonight, I mean, the trees, you know, it basically super rapidly advances the hardening off. It's when it's vegetative and we drop really, really cold. So that's not really related to the windmills, but the water, the windmills are very expensive and you have to have the inversion. If you rehydrate and then turn on during the event, you still want to welcome that it gets down to 32 or below to harden them off. You just don't want the killing event.
Really good point, Hal. And then Corinne's last question was, you know, again, replacing the trunk on a first or second leaf tree. You have some new shoot growth. I think that Hal did a really great, both Hal and Mike provided some, and Janine provided great information on that, on those young trees. I really liked that rule of thumb about is 50% of the tree damaged or more. Probably not gonna be a winner in the future. And also, how much growth did you get during that second leaf, as Janine so aptly pointed out? With any tree, freeze damaged or not freeze damaged, if you're totally stalled out in the second leaf, maybe it's time to yank the tree. Any other questions from the panel or other thoughts in these final moments that we haven't shared yet?
I just wanted to bring up that it is important, if you do suspect frost injury, to be aware of it through the winter, because you'd be amazed at how much these walnut trees can get sunburned, and that freeze damaged tissue is more sensitive, and you can see that happening in months like January, February even. So to be aware of that. And then just to reiterate one more thing that Luke had brought up earlier, is if there is freeze damage and And so we experienced what we did like in the last few years in the springtime, is to really wait, okay, on your trees. Give them a while into at least early June to see where those adventitious buds, those latent buds may break before you start pruning. So I just wanted to bring that up as a final point.
Absolutely. A really great final point on recovery. And I think my final point would be to echo what's already been said, which is I think that you know, we need to invest in more monitoring in our walnut orchards in terms of frost alarms and weather stations, and being much more active. And you know, it's so easy to just, we're all exhausted after harvest. And we just want to go fishing or go camping or go to the coast, and you got to stay alert. This is something that 2018, 2019, and 2020, different growers across the state got hit by sudden autumn freezes. So this has just got to be part of the every year program for every walnut grower, that they have to be cognizant of this, and stay alert. And just tremendous thanks to the panel. Really great information shared, particularly by our grower panelists. Just really appreciate those great insights. Thanks to Sherry Cooper, Program Support Unit. And please, 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 if you haven't already, go and fill out that Walnut Freeze survey. That is going to teach us researchers so much more, so that we can shape our research and our education going forward. So if no one else has anything else, I think we'll close out the meeting, but thanks to all.